known as probability sampling, involves giving everyone in the population an equal chance of being selected for the sample. So for example, the respondents are often randomly chosen by the computer using information from a database. And if we get our random sampling random enough, an equally likely probability that a person selected in the sample from the population, you're likely to end up with a sample that matches your market segmentation demographics anyway. Stratified sampling. Stratified sampling we define as being a proportional selection from a proportional market segment. Let's have a look at this company here. Full-time employees, they've got 40 female and 30 male. Part-time employees, 20 female and 10 male. Proportional selection from proportional market segment. Your question: how many should be sampled from each segment according to the information? We've kept the numbers here pretty simple to make things easy to deal with. Right, full-time, 40 plus 30 plus 20 plus 10 gives us 100, right? We have 100, and what proportion of the stratified sample should we ask that are going to be full-time female? 40% of 40, 16 people. So we need to ask questions of our sample. We need to target 16 full-time female workers. Part-time females, 20% of our population. Stratified sampling, 20% of 20. We need to ask four female part-time workers in our stratified sample. Across to the males, we've got 30% of males, not 30% of males, 30% of our population is male that works full-time. Stratified sampling, 30%, 30. We need to interview 9 full-time male staff, and part-time male staff, 10% of the population. 10% of the population, we need to interview just 1. Advantages and disadvantages. Okay, this method benefits from using samples that are more representative of a particular market segment. Samplings are usually random, but with clearer focus, so the findings will be more relevant and with less sampling errors. A major disadvantage of stratified sampling is that it can be difficult to select relevant strata, especially if the subgroups of a population are largely the same, homogeneous. It can also be an expensive task to generate accurate information about the population and then to further subdivide this into representative subgroups. It's not always going to be as easy as male, female, full-time, part-time. Cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is used when getting feedback from respondents involves too much time, travelling or money. For instance, it would be too time consuming and costly for a multinational to randomly interview people across all the countries that it operates in. Instead, it's more cost effective to select several geographical areas. These are our clusters. Geographical areas known as clusters, and then randomly interview people within each of the chosen clusters. A firm selling travel insurance might, for example, choose to survey people living in towns near seaports or airports. The opinions from the selected clusters are used to represent the views of the population. So we could have a cluster from one part of a country and another cluster from another part. We could further divide that up: people living in urban areas, people living in small towns. Different clusters, different information, but if we get enough clusters, we've got a representative sample of the whole population. Advantages of using cluster sampling are that it's quicker, easier and cheaper than other methods of sampling if the population is widely dispersed over different geographical areas, and where characteristics of customers are homogeneous, it is not necessary to sample people from every location. Main drawbacks of using cluster sampling are bias and sampling area. By selecting and using just a few locations, the results may be biased because people living in the same area are likely to share the same views or characteristics, such as lifestyle and social status. Increasing the number of clusters in a sample would reduce bias and sampling errors, but will clearly add to cost and prolong data analysis. Moving on, we come to snowballing. Snowballing is quite simple actually. What we need to do is identify a few participants from our target market, and then once we've got the information that we need from those respondents, we ask those respondents to recommend people within the same demographic to us. We chase them up and conduct the research on them. We start with a relatively small group of people, and we use that small group of people to find other respondents and make our sample size bigger. So essentially we're just using word of mouth to generate our sample. The main advantage of using the sampling method is that it's cheap to get hold of the research subjects' contact details, but due to the nature of respondent driven sampling, it's extremely difficult to make unbiased estimates from the sample. For example, a wealthy person's acquaintances are likely to have similar lifestyles and attitudes, thereby enlarging potential bias to the sample. Now, an exam tip. When the exam asks you which sampling method is the best method, each method has its own strengths and weaknesses. With all forms of sampling, there is a risk that the sample may not represent the population. Sampling errors such as bias or an inadequate sample size will hinder the validity of the findings. The best method of sampling for a business depends on its size, financial resources, the purpose of its research, and the extent to which customers have homogeneous or heterogeneous tastes. It's important, as always, to put your answers in the context of the business. Limitations of sampling and sampling errors. There are two types of sampling errors: non-sampling researchers' mistakes, and non-sampling respondents' responses. Sampling errors. Sample size being too small. When the sample size is too small, it's very difficult to get an adequate representation of the entire population. Not representative of the population. Your sample selection is not random enough, and perhaps inappropriate sampling methods being used. We've already established that snowballing is not the most representative method for obtaining your primary research. And there could be bias present in the research.
Show me. Snowballs here, aunts and stepdads across the country are braving the crowds to get their hands on the must-have gift for 2008, the Presto electric tea kettle. After appearing at the top of Good Housekeeping's 2008 list of top 10 gifts for young people you barely know, the teapot has been nearly impossible to find due to demand from aunts and stepdads desperate to get the perfect gift for relatives they are hopelessly out of touch with.
We can't even keep them on the shelves. They're selling faster than last year's purple fleece robe and the dog coin bag that barks when you put coins in it.
Stores nationwide report they are sold out of the kettle. In Akron, Ohio, hundreds of aunts and stepdads lined up hours before this store opened after word got out that it had received a new shipment of electric tea kettles.
Everyone needs a tea kettle when they're in college, which I think my nephew is.
I wish I could see Becky's face when she opens this on Christmas morning, but I think she's going to be at a real dance.
Shoppers who were lucky enough to get the coveted item are saying the trouble was well worth it.
I think I did great, but Becky won't let me in her room, so I hope she doesn't already have one of these.
stores are trying to pair the electric tea kettle with other gifts no one under 50 would want, like this selection of herbal teas, packed in a tin shaped like a cat. But the added stress of the holiday seems to be bringing out the worst in people as well. Earlier today, police were called to a Kansas City mall after stepdads began fighting over a store's last remaining Presto tea kettle. Police did not arrest the men, stating that, quote, as estranged stepdads hopelessly trying to attain the affection of children who do not and will not ever love them, the men have suffered enough this holiday season. That seems like a perfect gift for my wife's kids. Coming up next, what's the true meaning of Christmas? Our Christmas panel dukes it out from the Christmas War Room. We'll be right back.
Okay, so you get your market research right, you're set to make a killing. Segmentation and consumer profiles.